Breaking news. Let's get straight to our Paula Reed. And Paula, we understand that Jack Smith, special counsel, has weighed in on the status of one of Trump's cases. What can you tell us?
That's right. Special counsel Jack Smith is saying that he is going to move to dismiss one of the two criminal cases against President-elect Trump. Here, he is referring to the election subversion case that he filed against President-elect Trump roughly 2 years ago. He is saying that, quote, the country has never faced the circumstances here where you have a pending criminal case against a president-elect. There is internal Justice Department guidance that says you cannot indict or prosecute a sitting president. And here, Jack Smith saying that, quote, this also applies to this situation where you have a president-elect. So he is moving to dismiss the election subversion case against Trump. Now, of course, Trump is facing two federal cases, both brought by the special counsel Jack Smith, this election subversion case, and then also the classified documents case down in Mar-a-Lago. Now, we've reported that the Justice Department and the special counsel's office have been in conversations about exactly how they want to wind down these cases. Now, we have not heard specifically about the Mar-a-Lago documents case yet. That is a little more complicated in terms of winding down because, of course, Trump has two co-defendants there who are not presidents-elect. So we'll be watching to see what the special counsel does here. But in terms of the special counsel's case against Trump related to January 6th and his alleged efforts to interfere with the outcome of the 2020 election, here Jack Smith asking to dismiss this case. Now, this is not a big surprise. A short time ago, a couple weeks ago, Smith has asked the court for more time to, quote, assess the unprecedented circumstances of having a pending case against a president-elect. And they asked the court for more time to assess what they should do. And again, not a huge surprise that they were going to ask to dismiss this case because the president-elect has made it clear. Once he's in office, he intends to fire Smith and get rid of his entire office. It was also expected he would get rid of the two cases against him. He can do that as president. He can have his attorney general fire the special counsel, dismiss cases. But here it looks like Jack Smith trying to beat him to it and asking for this case to be dismissed. And we're watching and waiting to see if we get a similar filing related to that other federal case pending against the president-elect down in Florida related to the alleged mishandling of classified documents.
Moun ki te kon li Fab La Fontaine et qui te li Les Animaux Malades de la Peste l'école, ba konnen si nou sonje Fab et Fraza qui nan Fab de La Fontaine, Jean de La Fontaine, selon que vous serez puissants ou misérables, les jugements de cour vous rendront blanc ou noir. En bon créole, moun yo konjou l'argent rele pédiol, l'argent ak pouvoir ouvert toute porte. Ou bien nous capable di porte en bois, pas goumen, à porte en fait. Juge fédéral qui était sous dossier Donald Trump lan, arrivé, retrouvé face au mur devant le duo puissant de Donald Trump et Elon Musk. Nous l'agent by Donald Trump pouvoir et puis kounya pouvoir fait Donald Trump, fait la justice américaine blanchi Donald Trump plus blanc que neige. Nous s'entendel en anglais, m'ral traduire, m'ral expliquer nous qui ça so dit en anglais là, côté que juge Smith lui-même, il vient retrouver le pas gen l'autre choix que annuler de charges fédérales que Donald Trump li te gen contre li. Yon c'était pour document l'État que le pas supposé déplacer le te pral tal serrer la Kaili Mar-a-Lago après premier mandat là et l'autre là tout c'est pour provocation incitation à la violence que le te fait partisan lui fait sous Capitole atteinte à la démocratie jou qui était 6 janvier 2021 côté que te gen moun qui te perdu la vie après 4 ans de montée descendre parce que justement leur gen pouvoir ou pas seulement ou bien leur président ou pas seulement un président comme Donald Trump ou pas seulement là pour signer un décret bon pour ou bien pour faire tweet à 3h du matin ou gagne une batterie d'avocats qui pourra défendre cause qui pourra blanchir pi blanc que un Clorox parce que Donald Trump te voyé nous al boire Clorox on Clorox ka blanchi au monde. Bon fait nous tande même information parce que son breaking news lié son nouvelle show en français. C'est toute radio, toute média qui a parlé de ça, médias français, médias américains, médias tout côté. Et médias pas nous en tout, CNN local pas nous en tout.
Logique des démarches déjà engagées par le procureur spécial Jack Smith que vous venez de nommer, après qu'il a demandé à la juge en charge du dossier l'annulation de toutes les échéances au calendrier de cette affaire. C'était quelques jours déjà, à peine après la victoire de Donald Trump à l'élection présidentielle le 5 novembre dernier. Ne faisons pas dans la demi-mesure pour toute cette équipe, de Merrick Garland, le secrétaire à la justice, en passant par le procureur Jack Smith, donc les magistrats engagés et jusqu'au dernier greffier. Il s'agit là d'un échec cuisant qui n'est pas seulement lié à la victoire de Donald Trump et à la protection de fait que son statut de président élu lui confère. Attention, je précise qu'il ne s'agit pas là d'une protection constitutionnelle mais purement d'usage. Il ne s'agit même pas d'une jurisprudence mais bel et bien quelque chose qui relève plus de la coutume avec comme seule référence un précédent il y a 50 ans. Mais clairement, dans ce dossier qui visait à démontrer l'intention de Donald Trump d'inverser les résultats du scrutin de 2020, vous faites bien de le rappeler, ce sont d'abord des erreurs de procédure à répétition, toutes détectées par les avocats de Donald Trump qui n'ont pas permis à la justice américaine de faire aboutir la procédure en 4 années. Aujourd'hui, la procédure est donc bel et bien suspendue, ce qui rend juridiquement possible la reprise du dossier au terme du mandat de Donald Trump dans 4 ans et 2 mois, mais cela est vraiment très peu probable.
Voilà, nous tendez en anglais, nous tendez sous CNN panouan en créole, et nous fait nous tendez en français. Deux gros tonton charge fédérale, li gen l'autre charge, li gen condamnation dans État New York, etc. Nous connaissons pays États-Unis, son État, son fédération d'États liés, et État yo même yo pratiquement autonome, mais gen fédéral qui gouverne tout État yo. Donc Donald Trump lui-même li te gen deux gros charges fédérales sous dos li. Justement depuis 4 ans montée descend a fait, batterie avocat la plaidé virer moun tourner moun et prétexter des erreurs de procédure et la loi c'est ça, railler Donald Trump. Mais Donald Trump ou doit reconnaître que le compte comment pour servi avec faiblesse justice là ni lui-même ni Elon Musk pour yo faire affaire pa yo pour yo joindre ça yo besoin et là y a fait là y a tellement fait de haut niveau y a fait classe y a fait mes bouche tout monde yo kon comment yo ka utiliser ça yo gagner pouvoir l'argent que yo gagner pour yo gon élection à tous les niveaux pour yo pour yon gon pouvoir absolu. Donc, justement, tant que j'entendais là, deux gros choses ça yo denied, yo levé sous Donald Trump. Qui sa bagay lan yi au juste? Bon, m'fè yon ti histoire pour nous, ou bien on ti rafraîchi mémoire, parce que soit sur channel ça, gen un pile information ou connaît déjà. Nous connaît Donald Trump, justement, li pas de vle quitter pouvoir, li te fait interférence électorale, côté que te relais de state, par exemple, Georgia, pour abonner mieux, m'te fait nous temps de voir Donald Trump dans téléphone qui t'a parlé 4 ans de cela avec gouverneur Georgia pour te dire dégager li besoin 11 000 voix pour gagner élection, dégager le fait joindre 11 000 voix. Pas bon ici aux États-Unis c'est un crime ça y. Et en plus, li pas accepté perdu élection, li te incité de partisans à la violence côté que yo t'a attaqué Capitole. Et qu'on y a l'était obligé quitter pouvoir contre lui-même, il était broté des documents d'État avec à la Kaili. Donc depuis 4 ans, Kassayo devant tribunal. Et nous gagnons justement juge Smith qui était sous dossier ça, qui c'est un juge fédéral honnête, crédible, sérieux, qui depuis 4 ans, Jack Smith l'a goumé pour justement justice faite dans dossier ça. Mais nous gagnons un l'autre juge fédéral, madame ça ko ap gade là, m'sot montre Jack Smith, mais dame ça ko ap gade là, lui-même tout son juge fédéral qui était nommé par Donald Trump, li rele Hélène ou bien Aline Cannon ou bien Cannon. Plusieurs fois justement, li mandé pour yo classifier dossier ça sans suite. Donc temps passé, joie passé, extension a demandé, nous songer avant élection, il était supposé prononcer sentence contre Donald Trump le 18 septembre, il reporté pour yo pas dire c'est persécution politique, etc. Et Donald Trump li konn comment pour le jouer à ça, pour le faire être li passer pour une victime. Donc, kounya, li vin élu, et là, nous songe en juillet dernier, Cour suprême qui gagne la donne majorité juge conservateur, Cour suprême gagne 9 juges, mais 6 juges sur 9 ça yo, c'est moun que Donald Trump lui-même li te nommé. Donc, yo te tranché pour yo te dit, un président en fonction ou pas qu'à poursuivre li. N'importe ça, un président en fonction fait, li immunisé, li plus blanc que neige. C'est un saint. De pour son président ou son saint, un président en fonction. Cependant, même décision Cour suprême, ça li pas dit rien. Le ou son président élu. Donc, c'est vide légal ça yo. Par exemple, nous, ouais, loi électorale ici interdit moun bay moun l'argent pour aller voter pour yo. Elon Musk lui-même qui ça le fait, li te dit et que si yon moun ou référé m'pa songe Jean le te dit bagay li pour m'te partager pour nous là, li te fait yon pétition en ligne de pour référer un moun pour le voter etc. parce qu'on pas ka bay moun comme pour la voter, li te font bagay comme si un système de referral côté que le t'a bay $1 million par jour randomly. Donc, moun sa chercher tout petit vie. Ça veut dire tout ça la loi pas dit. Tout petit sous-entendu, yo contourner l'en faveur pa yo. Eh bien, qu'on y a comme décision Cour suprême nan dit yon président en fonction, yo pas dit rien pour président élu. Donc, qu'on y a juge fédéral nommé par Trump, Aline Cannon, li mande juge Jack Smith pour annuler charge contre Trump. Jack Smith a résisté malgré menaces, nous s'entendez ça dans premier parti me fait nous entendre en anglais et en français tout, Donald Trump promet pour le révoquer, c'est ça Donald Trump fait pi bien. Est-ce que juge dans ces révocations que le peut penser que son juge qui est très honnête, c'est pas révocation seulement le peut, mais il connaît ça l'a fait, c'est comme si ou goumé ou gen tan ou victime d'avance. Si adversaire là lui-même li rive sous à force, seul ce qu'a fait c'est déposer les armes la guémen. Donc Jack Smith li vinn rive côté li face au mur, li pas gen assez de temps encore devant pour l'avancer à dossier malheureusement depuis 4 ans avocat Donald Trump a plaidé bloquer ça et puis avec des juges tout nous autres qui nommés par Trump qui t'a bloqué fait obstacle à la justice. Donc, Jack Smith lui-même li obligé annuler charge. Est-ce que ça veut dire Donald Trump était innocent? Non, c'est pas un verdict, c'est pas innocent que était innocent. Yo juste classé ça sans suite. En tout cas, c'est le commencement de la douleur pour ni moun qui te supporté Donald Trump, pour ni moun qui pas supporté Donald Trump parce que tout le monde pral victime. Là nous tout nous connaissons symbole la justice, c'est une femme qui gen yeux bandé, ça veut dire qui pas ouais. La justice li aveugle, li pas kon wal pas ta supposé ni ouais ni ouais président, ni ouais millionnaire etc. Li ta supposé trancher. Mais moi pense c'est pas ça qu'a fait. Bon, c'est pas que moi pensé l'éclair, c'est pas ça qu'a fait. Le regardez là où même moi le font excès de vitesse, la police ta campo ou pas arrêté. Y a point là, y a pas arrêté, y a metto en prison, etc. Le nous kon quantité bagay Donald Trump fait, le kounya la sou fait incitation à la violence ka poursuivre ou metto en prison, le nous connaît justement ces choses ça obligé bay vague pour Donald Trump qui te voyé attaquer Capitole yon pays et le nous connaît tout sotamment qui font commentaire déplacé qui paraît ton harcèlement son mon ka prend prison le nous connaît Donald Trump lui-même li gen charge et sexuel etc. sous dol et puis Donald Trump li blanchi plus blanc que neige. Est-ce que ou même côté démocrate côté républicain est-ce que sent confortable le ou nos système de justice qui on balance qui pas balancé côté que selon l'argent mais pouvoir mais justice fait me connaît ou même comment sent est-ce que senti bon grand pile monde qui pral dire ça pas étonné de Amérique. Nous connaissons déjà comment nation ça lui-même li construit. Mais ou même capable prendre, ou même qui fait vini cap vivre dans pays, et ou même tout qui était là longtemps. Nous pas dans partisanerie, ko républicain, ko remen Donald Trump, ko pa remen, ko démocrate. Femme connaît ou même à qui sentiment, l'on a gardé bagay ça, ou a fait comment sentir. De pour faire commentaire là dans le respect, li valoriser. Merci beaucoup, moi pral quitter nous là. Qui t'aime tout dire nous happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving c'est fête États-Unis que moi remè en pile parce que li mando pour step back, pour break compte bénédiction. M'a vini avec une vidéo côté que Kamala li même li parler, li voye sou elle, m'a traduit pour nous. Si nous voulons mettre traduction, m'konne nous te remè traduction, mettez traduction dans commentaire en bas vidéo et puis dit ma pi Thanksgiving tout, n'a fait me content parce que moi remè Thanksgiving. Et puis, non seulement m'a traduit vidéo pour nous, mais qui t'aime dire nous tout, grand pile grassroots mouvement qu'a fait là, qu'a demandé pour yo recompter vote yo. Ça veut dire, dans jour qu'a vini là, yo ka gen causé. Et Joe Biden, li gen un mois et demi devant pour prendre de gros tonton décision. Ou même, ok. On nous parler. Bon, faut participer dans prochaine vidéo m'a bien pour me faire après traduction. D'après ou même qui décision ou pensez Joe Biden li ta doit prendre là dans restant le rete à tous les niveaux. Fais me connaître so penser dans commentaire. M'aller m'a quitter nous là et puis m'a quitter reste reportage ça sous décision en anglais pour nous côté que ou même on capable vivre li. Moi Raymond en pile à très bientôt pour une autre vidéo.
Without prejudice, what does that mean in this dismissal?
It means that it can be brought again. When you dismiss something with prejudice, double jeopardy has attached. You cannot be charged again for the same crime.
With prejudice is prejudice against the prosecution.
Exactly.
Don't do this again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's you agree that it's over. And so without prejudice means as if the case has not existed and it can be rebrought. And the real issue here is by Jack Smith doing this now, as opposed to waiting, which is definitely an alternative he could have pursued. He really maximized the chances that the judge was going to do what she did, which is grant this without prejudice. And symbolically, that is also important because, as Jack Smith saying, we still have the same view of the merits, and we are not dismissing these charges with prejudice as if it has gone away and we think he didn't do anything wrong. It could be brought again, as remote as that possibility is.
Was there any option here for the Trump lawyers to request that the dismissal be with prejudice?
Yes, there was. It is surprising to me that they did not say that. They, according to the government's papers, agreed that this would be dismissed without prejudice. It remains to be seen whether that was a mistake on their part, that they should have asked for that, or whether they think, you know what, once Donald Trump is the president on January 20th, he has various options. He can obviously try to pardon himself, and he can also make sure the Department of Justice doesn't go forward with any case for 4 years as to himself. I mean, obviously he will do that. But it's not clear that he can pardon himself. And it's also not clear that he could reopen this case to say, Judge Chutkan, we now want you to change your dismissal that was without prejudice to something with prejudice. That's a much harder burden for them to undertake. So by doing this, Jack Smith has, now with the judge's ruling, made it pretty sort of not ironclad, but pretty darn close to ironclad that this is dismissed without prejudice. I still think it's a long shot to think that this would ever get sort of resuscitated.
Neil Katyal, does this wrap up the January 6th case in such a way that it allows the special counsel to write a report on that case, submit that report to the Attorney General, and then have that report made public?
Yes, all of those things can happen. And just to rewind the tape, what Jack Smith did today is he said he had to dismiss these two indictments, or he dismiss his indictment because of two memos written by the Justice Department in 1973 and 2000 that forbid the indictment warrants of a sitting president. Now, those didn't directly control this case because Trump was a private citizen when he was indicted, so it wasn't like 73 or 2000 in which the question was, could you, for right away, indict a sitting president? But the Justice Department today concluded that the same logic applies. And I think the most important point about this, and it'll come out, I suspect, in the final report, is this is a really good example of the Justice Department being principled. I think it's in the finest traditions of the department. The Justice Department could have, read those two memos, said they don't apply, that this case is different because it's not the same. It doesn't involve, it involves someone who's indicted before he was president and the like. But they did none of that. They just, stuck to the law, stuck to the memos that had been written before. And so when Trump gets off these charges today, I think it's important our viewers know he's not getting off them because A, he's innocent, or B, because Trump pressured and intimidated Smith into dropping those charges. He's getting off because of a long-standing Justice Department policy. And as you mentioned, Jack Smith even went so far in the filing today as to say, our view of the merits, that is Trump's guilt and innocence, hasn't changed at all. The only thing that's changed is that he's now president, and under these two memos, he can't be indicted then. So I suspect all of this will be written into that final report that Jack Smith writes.
And Neil, you were involved in drafting guidelines for special counsel in the Justice Department. Is it likely that this report will be public?
Yes, I think almost certainly. When we wrote the regulations back in 1999, it was right after the Ken Starr, Whitewater, Monica Lewinsky report, which I think everyone thought was horrendous. And at the time, there was a belief that these reports would largely stay more confidential. But every special counsel, Lauren, since has disclosed through the Attorney General, has made a public report. And I think it's because public confidence in the administration of justice requires it. And here it's really, I think, particularly important because remember, so many people are being prosecuted for January 6th, going to jail for January 6th, including new people just indicted today. And it would be very anomalous if the kind of person at the top of that wasn't subject to any form of accountability, even if it's just a public report, whereas everyone else gets essentially the hammer.
So, Andrew, I know there are people out there wondering, why didn't Jack Smith and Merrick Garland fight these cases all the way to the last day, till January 20th, Inauguration Day? What are the advantages to Jack Smith making this decision to wrap these cases this way now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there are pluses and minuses, and I think the audience members can make up their own mind. By doing this, Jack Smith has maximized his chances, and in fact, they came to fruition that this would be dismissed without prejudice, and it makes it much harder for President Trump on January 20th to try and have these cases dismissed with prejudice, because the case is now over and the judge has made her decision. If he had waited, the advantage of waiting would be, you know what, we're not going to do your work for you. If you want to dismiss this case, you have to do it, and you take whatever hit comes from that. If you're going to dismiss it based on these Office of Legal Counsel memos, Department of Justice policy, you're going to have to do it. We're not going to do it. But if that happened, there's no question that Trump's Department of Justice would have said this should be dismissed with prejudice. So viewers can decide which one they think is better, whether, yes, this does make it clear that Donald Trump is not taking the action. But on the other hand, I think that what Jack Smith did here is, I think, really helpful in terms of sending the right message that they want to send about this case, which is it's not based on the merits.
Paula, as you said, these filings not coming as a surprise, given that Donald Trump won the 2024 election. But stepping back, put this into context for us more broadly, because this is the closure of one of the most significant chapters of the legal woes that Trump has faced. These charges were filed more than a year and a half ago, and a lot of work went into this.
Yeah, I mean, this must be devastating for the special counsel, Jack Smith. He was brought in to handle these two cases. But the fact is that there is internal Justice Department guidance that says that you cannot indict or prosecute a sitting president. And they had to discuss with the leadership of the Justice Department, well, what do you do with a pending case against a president-elect? And a source familiar with this thinking tells me, look, Smith is a rules guy. He wants to follow the procedures, the practices of the Justice Department, which is why he is moving to dismiss this case. Now, what's also interesting about this case is this is the case where the Supreme Court had to answer the question of whether the former president at that time, former President Trump, had any immunity to shield him from some of the charges in this case, because his lawyers argued that some of the allegations were related to his official conduct. And the Supreme Court took roughly 7 months to weigh in on that question. And of course, they did rule that he had some immunity to protect him from prosecution. But if the Supreme Court had weighed in when Jack Smith initially asked them roughly a year ago, last December, it is possible that the special counsel could have had time to bring some case, depending on what would remain after the Supreme Court's analysis. But the Supreme Court, again, waiting 7 months to reveal the answer to that question, making it virtually impossible that the special counsel could bring this case. And this was really the only federal case that they could have realistically brought against Trump before the November election. Even people on both sides of the aisle have told me that the classified documents case was going to take longer, no matter who the judge was. But again, the special counsel definitely hindered by the Supreme Court taking so long here. But look, the Trump lawyers, they also deserve credit. They have very aggressively litigated on behalf of their client pretty much every conceivable constitutional claim that he could make. They have made it, and they were successful even beyond their expectations with the immunity argument at the Supreme Court. But once he became president-elect, they made it clear they were going to press to have all of these cases tossed out. And if they weren't, Trump was going to have his attorney general do it once he or she got into office. So this is not a huge surprise, the special counsel moving to dismiss this historic case.
All right, Paula Reed, thank you so much.
Yeah, please stand by, Paula. We want to discuss this and more with Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman of New York. He sits on the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. Just right off the bat, your reaction to Jack Smith announcing that he will file to dismiss the charges in the election subversion case against former President Trump.
Well, look, I certainly understand why he did it, given the Department of Justice policy that you cannot prosecute a sitting president. I think it is a shame for justice in this country. It establishes that Donald Trump is above the law. The Supreme Court put him above the law in that opinion that Paula just mentioned. But now he appears to escape full accountability for what were crimes charged by a grand jury. And I would just add one other thing that we ought to pay close attention to. We cannot normalize the fact that Donald Trump, as the president-elect, should not be held accountable for crimes that he committed before. If he were to have fired the special counsel, that would be a gross abdication of the independence of the Department of Justice. And if the shoe were on the other foot, for example, and Joe Biden were to have fired David Weiss, who clearly had a politicized investigation because the House Republicans effectively scuttled a plea agreement, everyone would be up in arms. So let's make sure that we don't normalize Donald Trump's political partisan behavior that has no place under our rule of law.
Congressman, you know that the American people were well aware of the charges that Donald Trump was facing in this case and several others. What do you make of the argument that they essentially served as a jury, and by re-electing him and now making him president-elect, they have weighed in on these matters?
I don't give any credence to that argument. I think what was very clear is that people voted for Donald Trump because they thought that he was going to improve the lives of the middle class. And perhaps, in addition, that he would secure the border. They did not vote for him to dismantle our democracy, to attack the Constitution, to politicize all of our agencies, and certainly not as a referendum on his criminal cases. Those cases should have been played out in a court of law. I believe the Attorney General should have started the investigation a lot earlier. I believe the Supreme Court should have moved much quicker in its opinion. And Donald Trump should not have been able to run out the clock on these charges. But I certainly don't think anything that came from the election was a reflection of support for Donald Trump getting rid of these cases, largely because the American people, as you and I, as well, we don't know what the actual evidence is.
I imagine that a lot of voters had to know that those cases would go away if he were president, given what you said about the Supreme Court's ruling on immunity. That doesn't change the way you think about this at all? The fact that voters must have known that he wasn't going to prison or be convicted of some of these crimes if he was going to be elected?
Well, look, I think ultimately the majority of voters who voted for Donald Trump decided that, what they're dealing with in their day-to-day lives, understandably matters a lot more than what's going on in a criminal court with Donald Trump. I think it's sad. I think it should be disqualifying, but I certainly understand why people are more focused on their price of groceries, on their job prospects, on the affordability crisis. But I do expect, Boris, that the special counsel will release a very detailed and exhaustive report outlining all of his evidence. That is the ordinary course for a special counsel when they wind down. And I would expect that the special counsel will do that before he leaves office.
And Congressman, before we let you go, I have to ask you about this. You recently introduced a resolution to clarify the Constitution's two-term limit for presidents. Do you think that there's a serious push among Republicans to change federal law to allow Trump to run in 2028?
Well, let me just give you the example that I just mentioned, which is that it appears to have been completely normalized that Donald Trump could either pardon himself or dismiss criminal charges against him if he becomes president. At one point, that was anathema, and everyone was like, oh my God, that's crazy. That can't possibly be. It's the same thing now. This is how Donald Trump operates. He floats it. He normalizes it, and then it just becomes part of the common parlance. And so we wanted to lay down a marker to say, and put everyone on record, Republicans included, that the Constitution is very clear that he cannot serve another term. And what my fear is that with him floating that, with some of his cabinet picks, which clearly are prioritizing political loyalists, that Donald Trump is well on his way to dismantling our government and the way that it operates. And we in Congress, the Republicans especially in the Senate, need to be a check and balance to ensure that our government continues to function for the people, not for Elon Musk and other billionaires.
Congressman Dan Goldman, we have to leave the conversation there. Appreciate you joining us, sir.